It's James Murray at Net News Ledger. We're here at the Thunder Bay International Airport with Dr. David Suzuki of the David Suzuki Foundation. We've had a long morning this morning waiting for weather. It's been a little bit of fun, David.
That's the way it is. That's the nature of things, right?
The nature of things. There we go. Now we'll have CBC calling me, asking me. Through the day, we've been talking a bit about the issues with environment. And sometimes the argument gets made that Canada only emits 2% of the world's carbon emissions. Almost like that's an excuse that we can get away with doing whatever we want. What's the real issue on that?
Well, the issue is that collectively humanity is now burning burning more fossil fuel and liberating carbon into the atmosphere than all of the green things on Earth, that is in the oceans and on land, can reabsorb. When we're in balance, then when you light a fire and that carbon goes up, of course it circulates through the biosphere and all the green things can reabsorb it. But our industrial activity over the last 150 years has led to increasing amounts of fossil fuels being used and liberating. And so all of the green things can't keep up with it. You can only load so much in, and then it begins to build up. And the carbon is like a blanket that you spread around the Earth, that when the sunlight comes through and then comes back up, it keeps the heat coming back on the Earth, in the way that the glass of a greenhouse will hold that heat that comes in. And so we've been warming the planet now for quite a while. And I remember with the first time I really began to take it seriously, I mean, I'd known about global warming since the 70s. The first time I started taking it seriously was in 1988, when I saw some actual data and went, oh my God, because up until then I was saying it's a slow motion catastrophe. Right. I really thought it was going to be 70, 80 years before we'd have to worry about this. So in British Columbia, I was more worried about clear-cut logging and overfishing in the ocean and pollution from chemical factories. But in 1988, I saw the data and I went, oh, this is not slow motion. We got to do something.
It's affecting us right now.
Yeah. So I was, in 1988, climatologists called for a 20% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions in 15 years. That was the call. If we had paid attention and done what they recommended, we would be well on our way to being in balance with the biosphere. But we didn't. And we have had the fossil fuel companies saying, no, don't take it seriously. But in 1997, there was the global conference on climate in Kyoto. I was there. And at Kyoto, all of the rich countries, the industrialized countries, said, look, we created the problem. It was us. It's not China, India, the poor countries. It's us. We did it. And so we have a responsibility to cap our emissions and bring them down 5 to 6% by 2010. That was the target.
Yes.
And everybody there agreed. The industrialized world had created the problem. Poor countries or developing countries like India and China and others were allowed to grow their economy and keep using fossil fuels. We were supposed to peak and bring it down. As soon as that document was signed, a lot of Canadian companies started saying, that's not fair. Why aren't China and India in? We all said in Kyoto, they didn't create the problem, we did. And then they said things like, but we're only 2% of the world's emissions. And China and India and the United States, they're the big emitters. Wait a minute now. You can't have, there are over 200 countries in the world. Collectively, all that they're doing is contributing. And we're only 5.5% of the world's population. But we're emitting 2% of the world's emissions. Well, right away, we're way over what is our share.
Yes.
And the important thing was, rich countries like Canada had set the way with our use of fossil fuels. If we didn't peak or stop our emissions and bring them down, why should India or China or Brazil or any of these other countries say, well, those rich countries did it and they're not willing, why should they do anything about it? We set the example. So it was up to us to lead by what we did. And our failure to do so is for our shame. And then to use a phony baloney argument, oh, we only produce 2%. Yeah, but that's already 4 times the world average. What the hell? We're disproportionately putting it out. And I think we've got a huge responsibility. The thing I've learned from First Nations is that when you realize how interconnected we are, you immediately have a responsibility. We have been using the air as if it was free,
Yes.
dumping our stuff into it. Well, now we better learn to have a little more respect for that and realize that right to use the air brings a responsibility to treat that air properly. And Canadians have not been doing that.
Now, are you hopeful as we move forward that we're going to change path and start taking responsibility?
Well, that's all I'm left with is hope, because I look at what we've done since 1988, and it ain't pretty. We've had lots of people saying, oh, we believe this is important, we got to do this. Yeah, but let's look at the results. Emissions have been steadily climbing like that. So what is the hope? You know, the hope is that sooner or later we're going to start paying attention to Mother Earth and say, we can't keep doing this. Mother Earth is crying and telling us. And then, of course, we're going to have to change. We're going to change because, you know, it's going to get so bad that we have to, right? It's a shame that we've spent 30 years arguing about whether it's really happening or not. The science has been in since the 1980s. Now I think we've turned that corner finally. We're no longer just arguing, yes, we're saying, how do we get this done? We've got a new government after 10 years of Harper. We've got a new government that has finally said, climate change is real, we're contributing, we got to do something. While Harper was in office, he denied, he wouldn't even talk about the word climate change. So that gives you some kind of, well, thank God Canada has emerged from the dark ages, and we've got someone that acknowledges it and is saying that he's going to take the right steps. But I'll tell you, what worries me is if we don't deliberately pay attention and do what the scientists are suggesting, then I think Mother Nature is going to hammer us, either with a pandemic that is a disease. That's why we respond to things like SARS and Ebola and these things that are coming out all the time. A pandemic like the Spanish flu epidemic would be absolutely catastrophic. And you know, one of the things that I have been adopted by the Haida people in the 1800s, they lost over 80% of their population. Over 80% of their population in just a few years. I have no idea how they survived that with their sanity. Certainly a lot of the dysfunctions that you see in First Nations across the country are a reflection of that dual hammering, the disease, which was catastrophic, but also the residential schools and the whole colonization process, which was really there to stamp out. So I think we've got to look to First Nations and say, how the hell did you survive all that?
Tough people.
Tough people. Because the Spanish flu killed less than 5% of the world's population, and it was catastrophic. What happens if we get a virus that spreads that's going to kill 40% of us? I don't think we could take it.
So, sitting here, got a little bit of gray hair.
At least I have some.
Well, at least I've got some hair on the sides. But what would your advice be to a young person watching this interview today? What should a young person do tomorrow morning, tonight, and Monday morning? Well,
I mean, it depends on where that young person is. If that young person is on a reserve or a First Nations person, very different tactic from if it's my kids or grandchildren on the west coast of BC. I think the non-Aboriginal community, young people especially, have got to get involved politically. If they aren't old enough to vote, the two most important people on the planet are mom and dad. Mom and dad, if they love their children, have got to become eco-warriors on behalf of their children. Because mom and dad are not going to pay the big price for our inability to act now. It's going to be their children and grandchildren. They're the ones that are going to bear the brunt of it. And so I think young people have no choice but to get involved, whether it's through mom and dad or going to actual meetings and start saying, look, you're asking my parents to vote for you. What is your position? What is your party's position on climate change? How serious are you? That's got to be, I think, the real challenge.
So for a young person in a First Nation community here in Northwestern Ontario, any special advice?
Yes, I think that they have to recognize, and James Gosnell said it way back in the 1970s with Pierre Trudeau, we own this country lock, stock and barrel, and he was right. So it's time now, I think, for First Nations to really exert their sovereignty over their territory. This is a really a seminal moment. I don't think First Nations realize the position they're in now. The courts over the years have ruled in favor of recognition of Aboriginal rights and the right to consultation, and all of these things have been painfully obtained
And
through
thankfully one is
court
I
cases.
think it's over 80 cases in a row now.
I don't know,
We've got
but
a
there
winning
have been a
streak.
lot. And that's got to be telling you something. And so now I think that First Nations have got to exert responsibility because they are the ones that have any idea or the experience of sustainability. Their people have been here for thousands of years. They know about sustainability. We in the non-Indigenous community have a tremendous opportunity to learn from them. And so I say to First Nations, to Indigenous people everywhere, get your culture strong, because believe me, the non-Indigenous population's got to come to you looking for help from you. You've got something we don't have, and that's that sense of connection to the land that brings responsibility to care for it. We've lost that. You look at any mining company, any forestry company, any fishing company, it's all there to take, and the more they can take, the faster their profit line goes up. There's no sense of responsibility. And that's what I think we have to learn very, very much from First Nations.
David, thank you very much.
Okay.
I'm James with Net News Ledger here at the Thunder Bay Airport.